there isn't actually any hot chocolate in here, just so you know. This pot of chocolate powder is just empty. Besides which, this Teasmade has like some encrusted gunk on it in like the Kells section. And me and my dad didn't think that it was safe to drink from this. As a matter of fact, but literally when I ran the kettle now just for this joke, like a load of like red rusty smut just poured into the teapot. So I'm not trusting this thing to make hot chocolate for me. So, Christmas, huh? Christmas, just a week away. With any luck, this video will release before it. Nonetheless, I thought that for this Christmas, I'd make this little hurricane kit here. Ending the year with a nice simple build that won't be too hard for me to get out in a timely manner. No, don't look at the runtime. No, stop, no! My schedule has admittedly been kinda balked this year. I got really sidetracked by exams and procrastination around about May, and I've been playing catch up ever since, but now I'm firmly back on schedule, and I'm hoping this video should be out by Christmas. Without any further ado, how did I build this? So, got this in the mail. Well, no, I didn't get it in the mail today. I got it like 2 months ago. But like, you get the point. I'm just gonna lead into a video. Anyway, so inside this box of 6 semi-skimmed milk cartons, we have a very cool kit. A Airfix product. 1975 Hawker Hurricane Mark IIB. The person I got this from on eBay has actually shrink wrapped it. Obviously, I don't think this was ever in shrink wrap before, but you know, that's good for shipping. It stops people from getting in, and yeah. So, let's get in and see what's inside. Of course, because it's been shrink wrapped, I don't know what's inside. I haven't opened this yet. Sort of know what to expect because it's an airfix kit. It'll probably have some parts inside it, but other than that, I genuinely have no idea. So, there we go. Smells like the 1970s. And now, as you can see, it comes with 2 schemes. The scheme here, and also comes with a Hurricane 1 optional scheme. And you can also see some paint colours listed, but because they're not corresponding with the current Humbrol range of paints, they won't be particularly useful. Anyway, let's get in. Inside, you have the instructions, a set of decals which are in incredible condition. Like, genuinely, I'm shocked. Like they haven't yellowed at all. Well, I thought I was going to need to leave them out in the sun, but these are great. Look at that. And I don't think these are aftermarket as well. These are proper originals. Anyway, this kit comes with some instructions which have some yellow spots on them, but they're in decent condition. Nice semi-gloss print quality. As you can see, the instructions are very simple. Not really much that can go wrong when building this. And you also get a range of armaments here, and diagrams for 2 schemes printed in black and white. Anyway, let's look at these parts. So, Very nice quality, these. You've got the fuselage, which is a bit warped, but I'm sure it'll fit together alright, ultimately. You have the underside. All the detail is raised here, as you can see. Very clean, not really any evidence of mold release. Comes with a little stand, which is great, and there's a slot which you can cut out on the bottom here in order to produce the effect of what to cut out the thing. It looks like someone's drawn on this with pencil, as though they were going to start building this, but never did. Then you have the top halves of the wings. All molded in very nice quality. I'm guessing this is an early release of the kit because there is little to no flash whatsoever. This is really impressive, genuinely. Anyway, you've got 2 different spinners for the propeller. I think one of them is slightly pointier than the other. Yep. And then you've got back parts, and then you've got some drop tanks. The pilot, who is in very nice quality. There's a bit of flash on him that can be cleaned up, but yeah, the detail is molded very well. And you've got one more part, which I'm not sure what that is. And then finally, you've got a sprue with some clear parts, and in here you have the cockpit. The cockpit is probably not perfect, but it's a bit chipped. But yeah, so this is actually genuinely impressive. Like, this is my first impressions, and well done on the shipping. And so yeah, looking closely, detail is raised all over. There's no recessed detail whatsoever on this kit, apart from on the ailerons. I'm sure model makers who don't like raised detail won't be very happy, but I don't mind it personally. And yeah, all these parts are pretty clean. And yeah, I really look forward to building this. So I suppose the only thing we've really got to do now is get on with the build. Oh wait, no, first of all, on screen, here's what you need to make the kit, including all the paints and anything I used for weathering, varnishes, and that sort of thing. But anyway, with that out of the way, let's get on with the build. This kit, being very basic and simple, was incredibly easy to put together, starting with the cockpit. I feel like I haven't focused enough on cockpits of late, so this time I'm going to talk about this one at length. The seat, just one part, slots right into the rear bulkhead before being glued into one side of the plane's fuselage. I painted the seat in Humbrol number 163 dark green, with the walls and floor of the cockpit all painted in number 78 cockpit green. I've always found cockpit green to be a bit of a strange colour to use. Out of also, it can be very runny, but it dries quickly, and as long as you keep brushing it in, it'll stick to the plastic very well. Indeed, I only needed one coat here. I was also sure to pick out the very basic control panel in number 33 matte black. Indeed, this whole cockpit area is incredibly flat, with no space even to put a wash. So instead, I had a genius idea. Using a bit of spongy foam on my desk, I dabbed on a mixture of cockpit and dark green in areas of the tub less exposed to light, just to add a bit of tonal variation. I know it won't be seen once it's put together, but it'll matter to someone out there, trust. Concurrently to this process, I painted up the pilot. Very nicely moulded for 1972 standards. After a little bit of cleanup, I painted his jumpsuit in dark green, followed by his face in number 61 flesh and the rest of his outfit in black. I also picked out his goggles in some nice number 53 gunmetal, just for good measure. Because I felt he needed just a little bit of contrast, I watered down a bit of black paint and some acrylic thinners and applied it to him as a wash, just to bring out the folds and creases of his suit. With that, he was done, and I stuck him in his rightful place in the cockpit. It felt wrong leaving him without a control stick, even in this barren, detailless cockpit, so I quickly fashioned one from a small piece of copper wire with the end dipped in black paint, and glued it between his legs with a dab of PVA. The last port of call before adjoining the fuselage hulls was installing the propeller. Installed correctly with the retaining pin in place, the prop can actually spin once the kit's done, and I think that's lovely. Anyway, with that done, I bonded the two halves of the fuselage together. The locating pins did their job well, and for the joined seams, my Tamiya Extra Thin effortlessly glued them together with a touch of good old capillary action. With the fuselage together, I could get to work on the rest of construction. During the construction process of the cockpit, I had also got to work on the underside of the Hurricane's wings. I installed the pylons for the two drop tanks you can build this plane with, considering them to be nice and reasonable. I felt like the bombs, rockets and machine guns you can also attach might have been somewhat overkill and also quite liable to break too. There are places clearly marked where you can drill through to create the holes, but in the absence of a drill or Dremel, I just used some files instead. At this point, I also attached the little air intake forward of the plane's wheel wells. Disappointingly, the locating holes for it were blocked up with plastic, and even once drilled out, they were too far apart to fit the part. So instead, I cut off the part's locating pins and glued it on without any extra support. Thankfully, it turned out just fine. I was later able to fill in the holes left behind with some chips of sprue and some cement. With this step done, I attached the top surfaces of the wings before installing them into the fuselage. It was a bit difficult getting them to fit, but once they did, the fit was very snug and ultimately I didn't require any filler for the wing roots. I then tried my best to sand down the fuselage joint seams without damaging the raised detail too much. Sadly, it didn't turn out perfect, but I'm not really going for perfect here anyway. Anyway, the final step was to add the tail wings, and once that was done, I was ready to get on with painting the kit. After applying a coat of No. 1 primer to the model, I used a wide, flat brush to paint No. 64 light grey all across the underside of the model, which had very good coverage. I ultimately only needed 2 thin coats of this, though between them I did try to use another technique which I hadn't utilised in a while, adding contrast to the panel lines with a pencil before the final coat, to add a little bit of extra visual interest to the paint. It still looked incredibly flat though, so using a mix of No. 64 and various other lighter shades of grey, mainly No. 127 US Ghost Grey, I lightly brushed and sponged some areas of the underside for some subtle tonal variation. Moving on to the top side, I wanted to use No. 164 Dark Sea Grey, but unfortunately my dropper bottle had suffered badly from paint separation and was also virtually empty. So, at first, I attempted to use the paint in a pot of No. 164 from a Harrier GR3 starter set from 1998. I could only presume that that paint, as you would probably expect with any paint that is 26 years old, had perished and was both significantly darker than what I had intended and had sort of taken on this nasty oily consistency. Nonetheless, I deludedly tried to use it only to realise that it was absolutely horrible. I quickly scrambled to wash it off the plane before it set and forced me to sand off all the kit's detail to remove it. Thankfully, I was able to get the worst of it off, and I ultimately settled on using a mix of No. 123 Extra Dark Sea Grey with No. 64 Light Grey thinned down with Humbrol acrylic thinners to get a close match to the colour I wanted. After a few coats, I had a nice even finish of it all across the model's top. Alas, this kit's raised detail didn't really show up very well after painting the grey on top. It is incredibly dainty and not very well defined, especially on the wing surfaces. As such, I once again used a mix of lighter shades, the No. 123 and No. 64 mix, with more No. 64 in the ratio, to create some tonal variants in various panels on the top side of the wings and generally across the fuselage. Following the grey, I freehanded the camo in dark green using the paint diagram in the instructions as reference. An annoying thing with a lot of these 70s kits, however, is that they only ever show you one side of the plane in the diagram. As such, I had to do the starboard side with no reference at all. I don't know how accurate the pattern turned out, but I'm sure it's good enough. After a few coats to get a nice even colour, I peeled off the masking tape protecting the underside of the plane and cleaned up any paint bleed I found. Oh fuck, I've been recording this whole time. And once that was done, I sprayed over the entire model in Humbrol acrylic gloss spray varnish, the first of a few coats to go on this model. Cracking out some masking tape, I mapped out a few small areas I needed to paint, including the band on the tail, some highlights on the leading edges of the wings, and the red linen covers for the machine gun ports, which the bullets would tear through when battle commenced. I gave these areas a base coat of white, as lighter colours tend to have rather poor coverage. The leading edges were painted in number 24 trainer yellow. For the linen, I didn't have any proper red paint, so instead I made a mixture including Vallejo 70.934 transparent red, Humbrol number 61 flesh, and number 171 antique bronze. I personally think that this colour better matches the dull red on the box art, so that's nice. Finally, the band was painted in number 90 beige green. 2 coats of these respective colours were applied to their picked out areas, although for the second yellow coat I did mix in a little bit of the red mixture to create a slightly warmer shade of yellow. I also added some yellow to the propeller tips. At this point I also made sure to touch up any areas of overspill or bleed across the model. Since the decals mostly didn't overlap with my new painted areas, I elected not to add another layer of varnish yet. These decals, despite being 49 years old, had not yellowed at all, so I didn't have to take any measures to bleach the carrier film. I soaked them in warm water and slid them into place across the model, with decal fix also applied to help ease them into the details, albeit there not being much of it. The decals had beautiful and rich colours, and whilst the colours weren't perfectly aligned in the printing, they were still absolutely lovely and incredibly sturdy. They were not entirely opaque, so on dark surfaces the white areas on the roundels and the duck egg green text did look a bit dull, but it's ultimately a minor issue. Having applied the decals, I decided to add the rest of the plane's parts, including the lower air intake and underwing fuel tanks, the landing gear, which were a bit fiddly to get aligned, and on the top side I attached the antenna mast and the plane's spinner. One thing to note is that this model comes with 2 options for the spinner, a slightly stubbier one if you're building the Mark I scheme and a more pointy one if you're building the Mark II scheme. With construction done, I gave the model another spray and gloss and moved on to a touch of weathering. Endeavouring not to destroy this model's meticulous paintwork with my wash like I did with my modern Hurricane build in February, I used white spirit to thin my black enamel paint for this wash. And thanks to my thorough varnishing, it was fine. Capillary action made the wash flow effortlessly into the panel lines, exhaust pipe gaps and landing gear, and whilst it couldn't be applied in many areas due to the general lack of detail around the plane, in the places I did put it, it really made the outlines pop. The next step was to add some wear and chipping around the plane, but first I had to add some details that were missing. One thing missing due to this old kit's lack of recessed detail is the cartridge eject holes for the Hurricane's machine guns, along with the actual gun holes themselves. So to compensate for this, I put some black paint on the end of a cocktail stick and just dotted it on where the hole should have gone. I don't have the skill or resources to actually drill anything out, so this may not be totally accurate to the way this plane's gun layout would look in real life, but I hope this is enough for most people. Anyway, returning to the weathering, I got some number 11 silver and, after removing most of it from my brush, dry brushed it over the raised rivets just to pick them out and make the surface look a bit more interesting. Then, using my cocktail stick, I lightly dotted some more silver along the wing roots and control surfaces to give the effect of paint chipping. And because there was virtually no discernible detail in this area, I made sure to also add some chipping around the gun access panels, as they would see regular use being opened and closed by ground crews before and after battles in the sky. To a certain degree it's exaggerated, but I'm not necessarily going for realism anyway. The final step of my weathering process was with some powders to dirty the plane up a little more. I used a mix of black, brown and rusty powder to get the effect of exhaust staining, gun smoke, and with some water added, oily residue and grime in some areas. I applied a lot of the more reddish colours to the exhaust pipes themselves, as on the model they are painted this very rich, red, rusty colour, but on the model I had painted them in gunmetal. Excess was wiped away with a Q-tip, and once I was happy with the results I sealed all that weathering in with another final gloss coat. To complete the model, I just needed to add a few clear parts, and for some extra detail, the plane's antenna wire. For the wire, I just used some thread. This kit doesn't have the post on the rudder to attach the wire to, so I had to fashion one out of a bit of copper wire instead. Unfortunately, I didn't have any superglue for this process, only PVA, so this kind of just became an annoying process of trying to keep the wire balanced until it's set properly, and subsequently keeping the thread taut until it was glued decently into place. This meant that the wire unfortunately wasn't as taut as I would have liked, and in the future I may fix that with some actual super glue. This bit was really the only moments of this build which I didn't enjoy. The canopy came molded in one single part and had a long scratch running through its entire length. I've seen other model makers who would have had a seizure at this, quite understandably, and either coated the entire thing in floor polish or vac formed a new part, but I don't really mind imperfections like this in my model, so I'm letting it slide. I did think that the canopy did look sort of squished. I don't know, but comparing it to a 2010 tooled airfix Hurricane Mark 1, it does definitely look a little flatter. The fit was gorgeous though, so no further qualms there. The headlights were a bit trickier to install annoyingly, and I had to sand one of them down to get it to fit, but once those were in, my model was finally done. So, I think you can probably guess what I think about this model. I really like it. It may be simple and old, lacking in most of the creature comforts we've come to expect from more modern models, but nonetheless I found it an incredibly enjoyable build to work on. I know for starters that people might take issue with my glossy overcoat, but personally I like it as I've never been one to rigidly stick to realism in my builds, and I prefer to capture more so the subject's essence, what you'd imagine the plane is looking like, and sort of evoking a more museum piece finish. The weathering turned out very nicely, and I'm all around pleased with this kit's paintwork, which turned out bold and clean while still showing some chips and battle scars. In many ways, this build reminded me of how I built this 1:48 scale Spitfire last year, with similar colours and methodology about its construction, but I do think that my skills have definitely improved. I found this build process much simpler than I did the last one, scale difference notwithstanding. In some respects, I think this Hurricane turned out even better than the Spitfire. Anyway, funny how I mentioned this one specific video, I wonder if it'll come up later. The decals on this kit are of astounding quality for their age. I don't know if they were just lucky and stored well for 49 years, or if the previous proprietor did something to ensure they weren't yellowed, but either way I was very impressed and they looked really great once on the model. The kit didn't come with any diagrams showing the arrangement of the squadron code on the starboard side, so I may have gotten this bit wrong, but again, I'm not going for perfection here. The decals themselves were great. The only qualms I really have with the construction of this kit were the clear parts and the adding of the antenna wire due to the weird, possibly inaccurate shape of the cockpit canopy, poor fit of the lights, and the excruciating process of attaching the antenna wire. The rest of construction was otherwise highly enjoyable, and in many ways the lack of exquisite detail reduced the stress of getting something wrong. Part fit was mostly good, owing to the fact that this kit's boxing was quite close to the original tooling date in 1972, and whilst a lot of the detail on the wings ended up not showing through, my weathering and paintwork did help compensate for that. And with some careful camera positioning, this kit as I have built it is almost a perfect match to the plane as it appears in this kit's amazing box art by Roy Cross. Rest in peace, man. Overall, for a kit of such advanced age, I had a wonderful experience building this, and I would highly recommend you picking one up and building it yourself. Since the subject is relevant, I wanted to talk a little about my videos and the models I build for airfixing, because if you've watched me for any length of time, you'll know that my build subjects can often lean on the side of the old and obscure. If you look through the past 22 episodes of airfixing, including this one, you'll find that 10 of them can include at least one build of an out of production or otherwise vintage kit. And this is actually very much a deliberate choice. You see, when I've browsed model making YouTube in the past, I noticed that videos often skew towards the same few subjects. You'll find new Spitfires and Hurricanes in abundance, along with a good number of Harriers and Gnats and Messerschmitts, but never many of these kits' older toolings, and barely any of Airfix's weird out of production back catalogue. If you search up Airfix Mini on YouTube, all the top results are of the new Mini, and if you refine it to Airfix Mini 1:43, only my video and basically one other actual build can be found, with everything under that veering off onto other topics. So I wanted to try and change that. By building these older kits that don't see the spotlight for some bigger model making YouTubers, I hope that I might have persuaded you, the viewer, to give them a try yourself, and maybe even inspired some of the few big YouTubers who have seen my stuff to build some of these old kits too. I'm happy to say that I've got plenty more in my stash, and I'm looking forward to building most of them. But yeah, I hope that sort of tells you why I like building all these old kits. I think they're cool, and I think they deserve more of a spotlight on this platform. Anyway, back to the rest of the video. Alright, the kit's done, and I've talked at great length about it, greater than almost any of my videos talking about a kit of this size in the past. So, the video's done, right? You thought that was the end? No! Ah! This is Airfix's 1/48 scale Sea Hurricane, tooled in 2015 with this release coming out in 2017. Unlike the old 1/72 tooling we just built, this kit is rich with massive amounts of detail and makes a quite challenging build once you get into it. Bet you didn't expect the video to go this way, did you? So, why did I decide to make this? Well, I wanted to make something bigger and cooler for the last video of the year. And also, I feel like I owe the Hurricane some compensation for badly fucking up my build of the starter set release of it back in February of this year. Finally, I don't build many naval planes, so this specification would be kind of unique to build. Anyway, enough dilly-dallying. What do you get in the box of this kit? Go on, This is the Hawker Sea Hurricane Mark 1B in 1/48 scale. Yep, we're making a big one. We're making a fucking big. Oh, wait, how do I open this? I got this for £20 at Alexandra Palace, and I'd say it's a pretty good deal. It's sealed, and it comes maybe slightly disturbingly with a healthy dosage of black mold. But you know, everything's still in the bag. All it means is that the staples holding the manual together are slightly rusty, but that'll be all right. And hopefully it hasn't done anything too bad to the decals, of which there aren't actually too many, quite nicely. So, what does this kit properly come with? Well, it comes with an instruction manual. The mold doesn't come included with the kit. I don't know where the mold came from. It was like this when I got it. I assume it was stored in the damp or something, but like I don't know. But just so you've got a very detailed instruction manual here, because you know it's a very big kit. 59 steps for a kit which comes with 2 schemes, which I'm probably going to make the first one because I like painting on tail bands, and also I like it's just personal preference, and that is represented in 2 decal schemes. So as you can see, there's a load of common decals, and then you've got 2 separate schemes in the corner here, separated off, which is very nice. So yeah, although often overshadowed by the Supermarine Spitfire, the Hawk Hurricane was in fact the RAF's most vital fighter during the early years of the Second World War. You can read the rest yourself if you're buying this kit. Anyway, if we look through the instructions, it goes through the cockpit, which is very detailed, sort of mostly constructed with frames. Instructions for optional features such as exposed gun bays and the aircraft stand, etc. So yeah, very impressive level of detail in this kit. You can also adjust the flaps for extra interest and play value. Well, not play value, they don't pivot, but you know, if you want to depict it in flight or with droopy thingy-bobs, it's good. Anyway, moving on to the parts. Hold on, I need my snips. Hold on. Probably an easy way of doing this, but here we go. Oh my god. Jesus Christ, there's like an entire dinosaur in this bag. Alright. So, on this kit, you have 4 main sprues, 2 of which make up most of the fuselage, and upon inspection, these are almost entirely free of flash, which is great. This kit, tooling date is the tooling date is from 2015. However, the pack design is from 2017. So this kit's probably about 7 years old, and it was tooled 2 years after, and it was molded 2 years after it was first tooled. So it shouldn't have aged too much. And looking through the rest of these sprues, there continues to be no flash. And as you can see, these main sprues come with 2 options for the underside of the plane, and this one is one that adds a tail hook, which you'd need on a seaplane for landing on aircraft carriers. Otherwise, you drive off the end of it. You can also see it's got 2 different propeller options, which I don't really see the difference between them, and massive amounts of different parts for all the fine details of the kit. All recessed detail, lots of lovely fine details, all nicely molded. Looking on the underside of the plane, everything's in lovely deep panel lines. There's a slight texture to the parts. They don't feel too greasy, so I assume there's no mold release. If we look under here, there are markings which sort of indicate where to cut if you want to display the gun bays open. And also on the underside, there are two divots to indicate where to drill a hole if you want to include a stand. I don't have any stands, but I'll probably get some at some point, so I'll drill these out later. Anyway, you got 2 different spinners for different early and late models of the Hurricane. It comes with 1 pilot in 1:48 scale, who's got a lot of detail to him, especially in his arms. There aren't too many glaring eject pin marks anywhere, and overall, yeah, really good. There's also 1 sprue with clear parts. There's a little bit of flash on one of the parts here, you can see in the bag. There comes with 2 different canopies. I assume these are for the open and closed position, or they could be for different versions of the plane. Comes with lights and the front glass, plus some more lights. But yeah, that's the entire contents of the kit, so I guess let's just start building. Ow! Fuck! Ow! The first phase of this mammoth build was the construction of the cockpit. First off, I put together the plane's seat, which came in 3 parts. I was initially worried that parts would be hard to align, as there weren't really any locating pins demarking where to stick them together, but it worked out once it came to it. Next, I moved on to building the frame of the cockpit. This consisted of 2 long spars, on top of which I would build the frame of the cockpit. It was fiddly to get these aligned, but I was able to make it work, and ultimately I was able to construct the whole cockpit frame in 1 sitting. I was making this for a solid half hour, you realise that? After I had primed the frame along with a load of other internal parts, the entire frame was given a coat of number 56 aluminium paint. At this point, I also painted up the rear bulkhead in cockpit green. Satisfied with its construction, I set about gluing the frame to the lower wings and constructing the wheel wells. Due to the frame being a bit warped, this proved a challenge, but with some fettling I succeeded in getting everything together properly. Because I wanted to show the machine guns inside the wings, I made sure to install the spars and guns inside the wings before putting the top surfaces on. At this point I also bored out holes for a stand, should I get one for it someday. With the entirety of internal construction done, I gave everything a coat of varnish and then weathered it with an enamel wash accordingly. Worth noting is I had painted some black around the internal wing spars, so when you look closer you wouldn't just see bare plastic inside the wings. Speaking of the wings, I of course had to cut holes in them in order to have the guns be visible inside. Unfortunately, my knives did not make this a quick process, and I gave up recording this step because it was taking so long. All you need to know is that I was successful, eventually, and was able to glue the top surfaces in very easily once the ordeal was done. And with that, the entire wing sub-assembly was complete. You'd better savour these boost shots because you're barely going to see any of this once the rest of the build is done. Next, I painted up the pilot, who was very nicely detailed, and I was very proud of how he turned out. I cemented him in and began working on the fuselage. I applied the decal for the instrument panel, then stuck the panel and bulkhead into one half of the fuselage, which at this point I had already painted up in aluminium and cockpit green, with some details picked out in black. I mated the two halves of the fuselage together, then once they were set I glued the fuselage down onto the wings. The fit of this wasn't perfect. At the front where the wings join with the fuselage there's an awkward step when the panels really should be flush, but it was the best I could have made it. Once all the glue was dry, I sanded down the seams to make everything nice and smooth before adding on the plane's control surfaces. The ailerons and rear elevator came as their own part and can be installed at any angle you like, but because I'm vanilla I just set them straight. But with that, construction of the model was complete. Moving on to painting, I first brushed on a coat of No. 1 primer as a base, then painted up the underside in No. 90 beige green and a few thin coats to minimise brush strokes. Before the final coat, I employed my pencil smudging technique to really bring out some shading in the paint, and once the final coat was painted over it, I think it looked absolutely amazing. To be specific, it was really fucking good, dude.
Looks like really good. Like, not even trying to gas you up, like nah. Man, that's fucking... looks really fucking good,
dog, in the words of a friend of mine. The top side began with an all-over coat of Humbrol No. 123 Extra Dark Sea Grey. This went all over the top surface and fuselage using my wide flat brush before I touched up some of the edges using a smaller brush I had. The camo then went down in No. 224 Dark Slate Grey. I really wasn't a fan of this camo because the two colours don't really have much contrast from one another, leading to the model looking a bit tonally boring. To remedy this, I would later sponge on some lighter shades to add some extra tonal variation to the scheme, which really helped make the colours pop a little more. With this done, I painted on the plane's tailband, though as you will soon see, this would go on to be an unnecessary step. Following a coat of gloss varnish, I prepared to add the decals for the plane. I started off with the yellow and red areas on the leading edges of the wings, and this was where I realised that these decals had problems. Remember how I mentioned earlier that this kit was seemingly stored in the damp by the previous owner? How there was rust and mould on the box and shit? Well, evidently the moisture had affected the decals as well, as they did not cooperate at all as I tried to put them down. The long thin ones wouldn't flatten down onto the surface of the model, so I ended up having to paint them on instead, and the two wing roundels I stuck on refused to soften into the panel lines no matter how much decal fix I put onto them. It was clear that these decals were not going to play ball. So, £10.75 and a few days later, I got myself a new set of decals from Extra Decal, and these went on much better. They conform to the raised and recessed surface detail very well. I don't doubt that with some stronger solutions like Microset and Sol, they would turn out even better. Now, there are a few issues I encountered here. One is that whilst the sheet does give you the option to depict many different schemes, there were no stencils, so this build would ultimately have to do without them. The other issue was that the scheme I ultimately chose to do didn't have a tailband, so I ended up having to sand it back and repaint it in the camo colours, which was annoying. But nevertheless, once all the decals were down, they looked absolutely great. Also, the experience of flaking off all the crap old decal was very satisfying. Before weathering the kit, I attached all the small parts to the undercarriage, including the landing gear and the tailhook. The wheels were painted in Tamiya XF85 rubber black, with the rest in Humbrol No. 56 aluminium. Finally ready to weather, I dotted on silver chipping with a cocktail stick all across the model. I then added an enamel wash into all the panel lines to help bring them out, which turned out really well, especially on the underside where it complemented my pencil shading. Finally, I added on my weathering powders in much the same manner as with the Little Hurricane, before sealing it all in with a final coat of gloss. To finish the model off, I just had to add the propeller, clear parts and the antenna wire. The prop comes as its own sub-assembly, so you don't have to install it before painting the rest of the kit. The blades were painted in No. 33 matte black, with the spinner painted in black mixed with a little bit of silver, because that's what the paint scheme seemed to be suggesting on the Extra Decal paint instructions. It's worth noting that this kit, like the little one, also comes with 2 different spinners and props for different versions of the Hurricane, of which I chose the pointier options as listed in the instructions. The gun sight and canopy were precisely painted with a cocktail stick, with any excess scraped off with another stick once dry and glued in with Humbrol Clearfix. With some actual superglue this time, I was able to get the antenna wire on nice and taut. The string is also slightly more in scale at 1:48 scale, though of course it's still a bit too thick. On the other hand, no one will really care. But with that, my build of the airfix Sea Hurricane was all complete. So, what did I think of this build? Well, it's definitely a step up in terms of overall quality from the little 1970s Hurricane, but that was a given. Part of it was mostly good bar a few small areas, and the detail on both the interior and exterior was top notch. If you like small details, this kit is great, but I still think it's reasonably approachable for someone just taking their first steps into larger builds. Despite the complexity of the cockpit frame and wing spar sub-assemblies, I found them very easy and builder-friendly to construct and thoroughly enjoyed the whole process of making this kit. The only major problem I encountered was with the decals, of course, but that's not the fault of airfix themselves, and since I was able to find suitable replacements in good time, this hiccup really didn't hurt my overall enjoyment of the experience. The only thing I don't like about this kit really is the camouflage colours, which have rather a lack of contrast compared with other camo schemes I've painted. But again, that's not airfix's fault! It's the Fleet Air Arms. So, in short, I really loved building this kit. If you can find a non-water damaged example, it's definitely well worth your time. The extra decal set I got was also excellent, well matching cartograph in their quality and ease of use. It's just a shame I had to forego the stencils, as they would have really added some great extra detail to this kit. Equally though, the cleaner appearance I ended up with still looks very nice. My paintwork, especially on the underside, is something I'm very proud of. I think that overall this is one of the best kits I've made yet. Yippee! So, there you have it. 2 very nice Hurricanes, all built up in time for Christmas. Provided I can get this video out in time. Anyway, I'd like to conclude this video by talking a bit about how my year's been, and what I hope to do with the channel next year. As you might be aware, my attempt at releasing 1 episode of Airfixing monthly didn't really go to plan. And also, trying to spend so much time on airfixing meant I didn't really make anything else, and I do want to make things other than small model planes and vehicles. I want to animate things, cover more topics, explore different subjects. So next year, I think I'm just gonna make and upload things when I feel like it, instead of just holding myself to a schedule that I can't stick with. I don't think it does me any good. But anyway, thanks for giving me a great year on this platform. The continued support from the small but dedicated group of followers who all come back to watch my content makes this entire thing worth it. I'd also like to give some special thanks to the following people: Oasis Oracle, my good friend and fellow model maker who has really helped keep up my morale as I've worked on my videos this past year, Corey Courtsu05 for his musical contributions to my channel, and to my dad, who has helped me with a good few of my videos this year, including driving me up to Norfolk just so I could get some footage of me standing next to a real Seppacat Jaguar for a bit at the end of my European fighter jets video. Oh god, I shouldn't have made that all one sentence. I'm so grateful for all of you. Thank you. Anyway, I think that's enough airfixing for 1 year. Merry Christmas, everyone.